consists of all individuals, that embraces all individuals, and that creates the kind of diverse and peaceful setting for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the American way. So thank you so much. We've just joined our live stream, so let's get on with the show. Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, our discussion focuses on nonprofits that help to build confidence, support, and opportunities for AAPI youth. My special guests today are Vanessa Leong, Co-Executive Director at the Asian American Coalition for Children and Families in New York, and Kyle Kafai-Chan, Program Director of the Community Youth Center of San Francisco, and Lua Pritchard, Executive Director at the Asia Pacific Cultural Center in Washington. And a reminder to Zoom attendees that we'll take 3 snap polls during the show, and we'll announce results, and your questions submitted through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. So thank you all for joining us. This is just a wonderful, wonderful discussion. Particularly during this month. May is Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And we're celebrating the achievements of these very diverse communities in the United States by talking with you and being informed by your experiences so that we all collectively can share the wisdom that you're going to bring to us. So be wise, I'm depending on you. And Vanessa, let's start with you as a knowledge holder and an expert in your part of the world. Talk a little bit about what it means to be Asian American in the United States today, where we are having outbreaks, as we have periodically through our history, of hateful language, hateful acts, alienating conduct, and how do we first of all understand the experience of what it means to be Asian, right? Which is just this huge, diverse community, and how do we ensure that America embraces us all?
Yeah, so CACF, the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families, we are here in New York. And we are, as a coalition, we work across the diverse Asian American community. And I think oftentimes we constantly have to remind folks about that the community is not a monolith. And that when we are seen as a monolith, it actually erases the beautiful diversity of our community. For groups that are from East, track their heritage from East Asia, Southeast Asia. We also work with groups in our coalition that work with Central and Western Asian communities here in New York. We embrace the term Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander community, with really knowing that our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander communities are smaller here in New York, but we want to also signal that we are open and willing to learn from that diversity and learn from and understand the needs, because there are folks who do identify. And for us, it's always been about data and information on our communities. So CACF for quite some time have been looking at how do we have better quality data on our community when information is not collected or we are just categorized as Asian. The needs and the inequities and the rich histories that our communities bring are often lost. So our needs are erased, our communities are invisible. And therefore, we can't have a proper community response to those needs or a proper policy response.
Well, as soon as you homogenize people under a heading, right, you're not doing justice. As a matter of fact, and I want to recognize this, the very fact that we're having this discussion can be viewed as offensive by some and legitimately viewed as offensive by some, right? The fact that we look at Americans and we make distinctions based in in race or ethnicity, where we should actually be Americans with pride in each of our different heritages. But we have a problem in this country, right? We have an issue that if we don't talk about, we're kind of bad if we do, we down, we don't. And in talking about it is so much better. Kyle, could you give us your take from where you are in terms of this really complicated issue? And then Lou, I'd love to chat with you and just sort of be informed by each of your sensibilities. And then let's really jump into the kind of programs that you're advancing. Kyle?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. First and foremost, thank you for having us. It's an honor to be on this panel with all the panelists here on AAPI Heritage Month. To answer your question, which is a very tough question to start off with, I think Asian Americans been in this country for many, many years, and we have a very complex and scope of immigration into this country. We've been coming in as sojourners, as paper sons, as high-tech workers, as refugees, as undocumented immigrants, and even recently as tech workers, right? But like everyone was saying in this panel, we're still pretty much invisible. We're still gaslighted into believing that we don't belong here. And like you said, conversations like this can be can be triggering for some, can be offensive for some, but at the end of the day, it's important. And what we do here at CYC Community Youth Center in San Francisco is we welcome tough conversations, right? We embrace tough conversations because in order for us to proceed forward, to move forward in this society, I think we need to talk about topics like this. And in a very cancel-like culture where everything's getting canceled immediately, like, hey, I'm walking on eggshells when I'm talking about this, I'm afraid to talk about this. I think we need to embrace tough conversations and welcome people and start talking about things that's not often talked about so we could get our history, get our narrative out there for people to see.
We must be assertive, right, Laura?
We have to be assertive. It is great work that needs to continue and even paid more attention to, because that's the problem. Often in the past, for example, there's so many important things like voting, for example. Who does America bring up next to mainstream America? Is the Hispanic Latinx. God bless them all, because you know they're our partners and they're our people too. But Asian Pacific is never in the questions in many different ways. So. But yet they eat our foods. You know, they're with us and they love our foods, they love our entertainment. But it's when it talks about big subject matters, especially where funding is concerned, we're often forgotten. And then because they don't understand who we are and how many of us and how different we are from each other, they have no clue. So they lump us together for many different ways. And that's why we're working so hard and been working so hard in trying to disaggregate our data. Not just Asian Pacific from each other, but Asians from each other and Pacific Islanders from each other, because we are all lumped together in so many different ways, but yet we are so different from each other. And we have similarities. People don't know that, but we also have beautiful differences, and other people need to know who we are.
And you make reference to it could be called pejoratively cultural appropriation or honoring a culture, but without being informed by its origins, right? Benefiting from a cross-fertilization that is happening now through the internet and through the fact that we are, as you said, through the foods and so on and so forth. But it is so much a richer experience when you actually recognize the distinctions and the glorious cultures that brought us those flavors, right? That created those plants that now are distinctive and becoming part of for example, the California economy, right? That are being grown and are being sold worldwide. Let's talk a little bit about this issue in general, because as you referenced, Lua, there are partners that have their type of experience, but in a very similar vein. And Gail Kong, my former and forever boss, just raise that question. Have community organizations, have you all hosted discussions with others who have the same experience as you referenced, Lua? And have you tried to galvanize joint efforts surrounding this idea of defining America, honoring different cultures, sharing knowledge and that? And Vanessa, I'll give, since you're nodding so vigorously,
Yes.
why don't we go over to you, and then Kyle, if you could also weigh in, and let's do a little bit of a free for all, because this is such a very important question that Gail asked.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the work that we're doing has to be done in collaboration and in coalition with other communities of color. Oftentimes, our fight has always been around uplifting those most marginalized within the AAPI community here in New York City that are often so erased by the model minority myth. And so
Talk about the model minority myth. I know we've heard it, but talk about what is the model minority? What is it to be a model minority?
Well, in essence, it's this almost innate ability to be successful in this country, that it's almost like through this hard work that it is kind of often a given that our community will be successful. And we know that at the end of the day, that's so harmful, not just for the Asian American community, because it erases the struggles and the challenges that face our communities, and actually says, like, why do we need to invest in that community if they're doing so well? But it also has been used, our community has been used as a wedge to justify underinvestments in other communities of color, particularly. And so, this is, it often seems to be like, oh, that's a nice thing to be like, oh, you're a model, but
well, also don't vote, just be a model minority. Don't raise your voice, just be a model minority.
Yes.
And by the way,
put your head down, work hard.
Right, and ignore the issue of poverty and suicide amongst particularly amongst older women in certain communities. It's basically ignoring. It gives license to ignore, because everything will work out. And by the way, don't talk, and that kind of. It's unbelievable. Kyle, what were you going to say?
Sorry, Mark, if I could jump in, because I think with the model minority myth, one of the talking points that gets often overlooked is, aside from the limiting of resources to AAPI communities, is also how it's used to pin other racial groups against us, right? So it's like the Asian folks are coming in to take our jobs, the Asian foods are coming in to gentrify us, to take our houses. But reality is we are facing the same struggles that any other minority groups are facing. And on top of that, another point that's often mute and not talked about is the underreporting of AAPI communities. I grew up in a family where we don't trust the government, and people don't talk about that, right? They think that, oh, if things happen, we automatically go to the cop. But culturally, we're trained to keep things in-house, to not bring shame to the family and not talk about it with others. So that's often not talked about with the AAPI community.
Lua, you are also nodding vigorously. Did you have a point that you wanted to make in particular about this topic?
Well, that's why disaggregating data is so important. That's why we're working so hard, have been working so hard, and still will continue to work hard, because there will always people, and plus, oh my gosh, government takes so long to do something. And so we've been begging to get our data straightened up. And even in the census data, and then because we're so undercounted as well, we're never considered up there in the big numbers because we're always undercounted. But I think everybody is undercounted for that reason. But we feel so undercounted because of our language and cultural barriers, we're extra undercounted. For those matters, and immigration issues as well. So that's why it's so important to disaggregate the data, because there's so many of us who are poor and in poverty and failing in school, and and not making it, and not going to college, and not getting the right jobs, and so forth. And so that's why data is so important. Very, very important.
There's also a matter of defining America. Could we talk a little bit about what America is? Because there is this issue you've heard about the great replacement theory, right? Where you have a huge number, a third of the population believe in this nonsense, right? And so we have to start thinking about America differently. How do you think about America, Lua, in terms of what America is and what America should be, and that delta?
You know, when I was growing up, there was always this thing, America is a dream place to go to. But then you come here and you grow up and you experience so much hate, so much racism, so much violence, and so forth. And is this the dream place that I grew up to want to be at? But we're here, and we come to the United States of America because we want to make something out of us. But that's the other stereotype that America has on us, is that they think that we came here just to get something handed down to us. Well, for Asia Pacific people, I can only speak for, we're hardworking people. We do not want handouts to us. We want to earn them. And so we work so hard to get, and that's the other thing. There's so much stereotyping of who we are. People hate us for the wrong reasons. And they're thinking that we came here, just like what Kyle said, we came here to take things from people here. Well, as we learn more and more and get educated, everybody came here. We're all immigrants. And what makes you different from any of us? We came here for the opportunity to learn more and to be someone, to live and to make that dream come true. And yeah, we help our people back home. And so what? That's love. That's the love of a family. And we deserve to do that because we came here to do that, to get that dream going, to be educated and to get something going.
So you just described every American and Native community of the lower 48, Native communities of Alaska and Hawaii, of American Samoa. You've described people who work hard, who want to be part, who want to help their families, wherever those families may live nationally. Kyle, what is your take on what it means to be part of this country, and also the experience, if you could describe your take on the experience of the different generations. In my family, my father came as a refugee, so I guess that would make me the first on his line who was born in the United States. And if you go through all of our folks that I know, those stories that Lua was just talking about, it's ubiquitous. Talk a little bit about your take on that question.
Absolutely. I could share a lot of similarities that I just heard. I immigrated to the United States when I was around 8 years old. Immediate culture shock once I got off the plane. I haven't seen so many people of different color. I came in the early 90s from Hong Kong, China. And immediately after that culture shock came a strong desire to fit in as a young person, and largely because at home, when I got to the United States, my parents was no longer home as often as they were back in China. They were working long hours just to find, make ends meet. And I think one thing that wasn't talked about, or that isn't talked about the whole immigration process, is resentment from the child to the parent. As a child, I did not want to come to the United States. I was 8. I had friends back home. I had a developed routine that I was accustomed to. So huge resentment. And on top of that, what my parents explained to me as the reason for immigration, the American dream, wasn't what it made to be. What I seen in reality was less time with parents working long hours. They became more stressful. So all of that was a different narrative to me, right? The whole thing looks very different. And then on top of that, there was a shift in family dynamic where parents used to be the caregivers, but now they're just bringing financial needs home. Right. I became the translator. I became the navigator. In many ways, I became the clutch in the family, right? So that further drove me away from my parents and into my friends, into friends that didn't know any better. So long story short, I got into a lot of trouble as a youth. And from that, it actually opened my eyes to know that my parents were the one that unconditionally loved me. So that actually motivated me to do this work I do today, which is to give back to the community, people that I could relate to. But all I could say is the entire immigration process is very complex, and it could hit people differently, right? And it's just with anything else. So it could go ahead.
And that story can be told from community to community to community, can't it, Vanessa? I mean, we all have so much to share. We all have so much in common. Vanessa, you want to comment on this topic that is so fascinating? And Kyle, thank you so much for sharing your experience, and you, Lua. Vanessa, you want to comment on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I know that, we all want to ensure that there's opportunities for every child and every young person to live to their fullest potential. We don't want to dictate what success may mean, but it is something that, that they can define for themselves. And
So you want to convey culture, but not restrict, right? As a parent, you don't want to place your child in a box. So you're trying to share.
We want to create,
alienating, right?
And create, those opportunities. I mean, I'm a mother of 3 young boys, and, I was, my parents came after the 1965 Immigration Act. They came in 1968. So I think I definitely different immigration experience. I was born here in this country, my 3 boys as well. And I think this need to, we also understand, like, when you're for so many immigrants, you're really just struggling for survival at times, right? And I think I've come as, being able to be born and raised in this country with a different perspective. Oftentimes there's not a lot of information about, what are the resources that are available for young people. We want to make sure that our kids are successful, and oftentimes that only translates to financial stability. But in essence, like, what is that? We can't often have, like, we've had our conversations with community groups, with immigrant families, when parents were like, I actually really, we're here, we immigrated to this country, we're struggling, but ultimately we also want our children to be happy.
Right.
And those conversations, again, the kids themselves are like, this is the first time I've heard my parents actually say that, and not worry about just my grades only. That this is an opportunity. Like, I feel like there's been spaces that our communities are connections intergenerationally need to happen, connections across communities. At the end of the day, that's what safety means for communities, is making sure that they have the resources and the support that they need to thrive.
And so let me ask you a couple of questions, and then we're going to go over some of the poll results. Do you feel like we do a particularly good or bad job of just talking about the history of the various peoples in the United States, as you're seeing your kids being educated, and as you've experienced education yourself? Do we really help to convey knowledge? Are we actually systematically helping to bind the country together? Or are we just ignoring a whole swath of history? And Kyle, I see you have a small smile on your face. See, it's dangerous to smile on this program. What did you want to say?
I want to end on a positive note, so I wouldn't say we're doing a terrible job. I think we're definitely getting there with the integration of ethnic studies in many places. But I think we still have a long way to go. With my story of immigration, being a first-generation Asian American in this country, I missed out the whole point or the whole piece of internalized racism, right? For the longest time, I was embarrassed to go out with my parents. I didn't want to be seen with my parents because I know they only speak Chinese. And when they speak Chinese, they don't just speak it, they speak it very loudly, as if the neighbors couldn't hear. So for the longest time growing up, I was ashamed to be Chinese. I didn't want to identify. I didn't want to speak because I speak with an accent. I was very ashamed. And I had to deal with that for the longest time. So for me, I think it's important for us to teach history, not just white history, but history of everyone in America, right? So we could all be prideful of something, to know that, hey, we did work here. Like Luau was saying, we didn't come to just take, we built stuff here. We left our footprints, but that just wasn't talked about, so people didn't know. So I think it's important to teach. But again, I want to end on a positive note. we're not there yet, but we're getting there, and I'm very confident about that.
Well, part of it is that, Lua, is that, and this is something that I've noticed in my life, people never talked about the problems that communities face, particularly Asian communities, Pacific Islander communities, Hawaiian communities. Nobody talked about it within outside of those communities. And the fact that these stories are being covered and covered prominently is a really important step, because now you take knowledge that has been promulgated within communities and you're sharing it across communities. Gail had pointed out, Gail Kong had pointed out that now allows communities to share. So you've got the ADL sharing with Asian communities this idea of talking about issues, talking about attacks, talking about defamation, talking about it as a very powerful first step of taking action. And so, that's progress, isn't it? Or of a sort. Perhaps it needs to accelerate, but we're getting some additional traction that we didn't have before, aren't we?
So Asia Pacific Culture Center was established 25 years ago to bridge communities and generations through arts, culture, education, and business. So we teach and showcase and represent the 47 nations that make up all of Asia and all of the South Pacific. And we find out that so much of what's going on with the Asia Pacific people really need for all of us, or as many of us, to teach others about who we are. And so because so many people like teriyaki chicken and teriyaki beef, but they have no idea that it's Japanese, it's not Chinese. So many people like the noodles, pho, but they have no idea it's Vietnamese. So the people in America need to know more about us, and that's what APCC does. But so we're going to the schools and Office of Instruction here in Washington State, and we've been working on this for a while. Not just APCC, a group of leaders of us, especially the ones in education. We want to teach Asia Pacific history in the schools. So that is surfacing more and more. That's one of our initiatives that we're working hard on in Washington State.
Well,
and
if you're going to, excuse me for interrupting, but you make such an important point. If you're going to be a country that is actively connected to the world, if you're going to be doing business in Korea versus Japan, or you're going to be doing business in China versus the Philippines, or in Vietnam, or in the South Asian countries, India and Pakistan and so on, you have to understand the distinctions. My goodness, you have to show respect. You have to be knowledgeable. And
Yes.
It's true no matter what you're doing. And what you're saying is, get it together, America, because if you're going to be strong and you're going to be a world power, you're going to be economically thriving. This is key. And
Yes.
if we look at some of the responses on the polls, it was very interesting. 70% of the respondents said that they were going to actually mark this month the Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Heritage Month with some event. Maybe it's going to a restaurant with family, or going to a cultural activity. Also, and here's an interesting, 88% said that we're not doing a great job of educating on AAPI heritage in the public schools. And finally, this is really interesting, where are the two places where AAPI heritage, culture, art, history, and traditions are best conveyed to next generations? And this is interesting. We say we're not doing a great job, but 70% said that's the best place is in the schools, in education, in sort of integration. And then the second best place was performing or visual arts.
Mhm.
And the third was through food. So I think we got all of your points, Lua, included. I'm going to go back and give the last word to Kyle. Kyle, in terms of if you were advising from your perspective as a child coming to Hong Kong who has gone through this emotional arc and this experiential arc that you described, and thank you so much for sharing such a deeply personal experience with us. If you were going to advise us in terms of how we should change, all of us, you, me, people who are not watching this program as well, how should we try to create a better country, a better, more prosperous country by changing our behaviors in this respect?
Thank you, Mark, for giving me a very tough question at the end. I would say stay trauma informed, be genuine. I think it's very important that we spend the whole show, whole segment talking about how diverse the AAPI community is. So it's really important for us to be trauma informed and to be genuine, and to recognize that everyone is unique in their own sense. Even within the Chinese culture, there's a lot of subgroups. There's Toisanese, there's folks from mainland China, right? So everyone's unique in their own culture, right? How they're raised could have a big influence on who they are. So it's important to really get to know the person for who they are. And instead of making assumptions, just because you're Chinese, you must like this. Just because you're islander, you must like this, right? So it's really getting to know the person for who they are and not make assumptions based on this first glance. I think that will take us a long way.
What a great exit for this fantastic discussion. You're saying be empathetic, be human, constantly learn, embrace, be informed. Vanessa Leong, co-executive director at the Asian American Coalition for Children and Families in New York. Kyle Katai Chun, program director of the Community Youth Center of San Francisco, and Lua Pritchard, executive director at the Asian Pacific Cultural Center in Washington. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you for informing us. And we will try to do better, all of us, right? And in coalition, we will try to move forward to create the country that we ought to be. We will possibly never achieve it, but it is one of those efforts that enriches our lives. Thank you so much. Thank your boards, thank your staffs, thank your donors, and stay healthy. Take care all.